Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, your host for Locked On Seahawks. Joining me for our Thursday episode, my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. We only have 9 days until week 1 when the Seahawks face off against the Colts in Indianapolis. And the NFL doing things a little bit differently this year. Every team's on a mini bye here before the start of the season. I've heard some players are arguing, why can't we just have 2 byes during the regular season? But at the same time, this is giving teams a nice little window before that season opener coming out of the preseason. Make sure everybody is healthy and good to go. Plenty of roster changes for us to discuss today, including a legend leaving to join the Las Vegas Raiders. We'll be bidding farewell to KJ Wright as he prepares to play for a new team. A lot coming up on this episode, so let's get rolling. Today's episode is brought your way by Run Your Pool. Check them out today and get $10 off at runyourpool.com/lockedon or use the promo code LOCKEDON at checkout. Now for your lead story here on Locked On Seahawks. We've talked about it for the last 3 or 4 months, really since March, when KJ Wright became a free agent at the beginning of the league year. There's always been the door slightly open for a reunion between the veteran linebacker and the Seahawks. Well, that door finally slammed shut today. KJ Wright signing a 1-year contract with the Las Vegas Raiders, who he visited with earlier this month. He left without signing a contract, but ultimately decided to reunite with Gus Bradley, who was the Seahawks defensive coordinator during Wright's first 2 seasons in the league. So some familiarity there. That's a young team that was looking for some veteran leadership, and they're going to get that on defense with KJ Wright. Not easy news for the 12s out there to be able to handle, because KJ Wright, and I'm going to say it right now, he is the most underrated star in the history of the Seahawks. He's not underrated in the Pacific Northwest, but the rest of the league, a player of his stature, the numbers that he put up in 10 seasons in Seattle, to have just 1 Pro Bowl to his name is pretty darn disappointing when you consider how great he has been since being drafted in the 4th round in 2011.
Great's a strong word, and I think it applies. I really think that KJ Wright is absolutely a terrific player. I think he's a terrific human being off the field. I think that he is absolutely among the players that should be under consideration to be among the Seahawks Ring of Honor. And I say that with a great deal of respect for the 14 men who have already been placed on that Ring of Honor, including, of course, Matt Hasselbeck and head coach Mike Holmgren, who I think should be in the Hall of Fame. I just think that KJ Wright is right there. I think John Williams. I think Brian Blades. I think that there are some really good Seahawks out there who you put their statistics against some of the other players out there that I think nationally they just do not get the respect that they deserve. And the fact that Bobby Wagner has received as much focus as he has, and don't get me wrong, Bobby Wagner is a terrific player and deserves it. And obviously KJ Wright and Bobby Wagner being friends, I think that it just makes that the fact that Wright hasn't got as much attention as he should, that much kind of weirder in a way. But I do think that it's important to acknowledge that Wright has been a terrific player, and not just the statistics, not just the fact that he played literally every single linebacker position for the Seahawks, not just the fact his durability, not just the fact that he comes back as a so-called over the hill veteran, comes back and has arguably his best season in 2020. I just want to, just kind of acknowledge the success that number 50 has had for the Seahawks, and then certainly wish him well. I think that when you look at the Las Vegas Raiders, you look at a head coach in John Gruden who respects veterans. You have a general manager in Mike Mayock. You have, as you mentioned, a defensive coordinator in Gus Bradley, again, who respects veterans, recognizes the talent that he is. I think KJ Wright is about to have a big-time season for the Raiders. I'm excited for him. And also, I'm also excited about where the Seahawks are, because they have a lot of young talent in the linebacker position. I think those who are, bemoaning Seattle's decision to let KJ Wright go, Have you been watching Jordan Brooks? Have you been watching Cody Barton? They've been absolutely spectacular. So it's a kind of a funny situation, Corbin, because I definitely want to acknowledge the greatness, and again, greatness that I think that KJ Wright has been for this franchise for a decade. I also want to acknowledge that I think the Seahawks are moving in the right direction because they're going with the younger, speedier players who I think fit in better with this current defense.
I could talk for hours about what KJ Wright has accomplished on and off the field since being drafted back in 2011. He started 12 games as a rookie. This was not one of those players that was a mid-round pick that had to bide his time to get playing time. He found his way into the lineup very quickly. And then the 4 straight years that they were the number 1 scoring defense, arguably the best defense in NFL history for a 4-year span, he was a key cog on that group. 3 of those seasons, he had 100 plus tackles. I mean, this guy, year in, year out, he was a beacon of consistency. He was a beacon of reliability. He was an incredible leader on the field. And you mentioned just the last 2 years. After the 2018 season, I think you and I both thought KJ Wright is going to be playing elsewhere after 8 seasons in Seattle. And the Seahawks ultimately surprised people by giving him a new 2-year contract because he only played in 5 games in 2018. Heading towards his 30th birthday, I think a lot of people assumed the Seahawks are going to move on. And all he did in 2019 was come back with a career-high 132 tackles, and then he had 3 interceptions, 11 passes defensed. Statistically, it's the best season he's ever had. I will argue last year, though, was the best season of his career. When you consider what he did in week 3, you're talking about a player that throughout his career, he has been selfless and he has been team first. And his teammates and his coaches and the fans, they love him for it. He exhibited again in week 3 by, somewhat reluctantly at first, moving to Sam linebacker to replace Bruce Irvin. And it let Jordan Brooks get into the starting lineup as a rookie. Not necessarily the position that he wanted to play. He'd been a weak side linebacker his entire career. But again, this guy is selfless. He's all about the team. Moved over to the Sam linebacker spot, and all he did was rack up 86 tackles. He had double-digit tackles for loss and passes broken up. And to be frank with you, he's the only player in the NFL that did that. There was not another player that had double-digit tackles for loss and passes defensed. And he was able to get a couple of sacks. He factored in the pass rush more than he has for most of his career. They call him Spider-Man for a reason, and it stinks that he's going to be spinning webs now in Las Vegas instead of Seattle after everything that he accomplished with the Seahawks. And that's also including off the field, going to Kenya and teaching children how to speak English and helping build a well for a school, coaching up kids in Haiti, building a school there. He's done things here in the local community where he's been a mentor for students, teaching them about entrepreneurship and how to use technology to solve problems in their community. I can keep going on and on. KJ Wright is as genuine of a human being, as good of a guy as you are going to find in the NFL. So from that perspective, seeing him turn in his blue and green threads for silver and black, it's going to be really difficult to see that at first, because I know this is an era where we don't often see players spend 10 plus years of their entire career with the same team. KJ Wright was one of those rare players that did spend a decade with a team. And I think a lot of fans were under the assumption that once he had played 10 seasons in Seattle, he's going to finish his career here. And that's not the way it's going to play out. But he deserves the opportunity to play for somebody. The Seahawks, you can understand their rationale for choosing to move on and go with Jordan Brooks and Darrell Taylor instead. But you can also understand from KJ Wright's perspective, look how productive I was last year. I've got a ton of great football in me, and I deserve to get paid after what I did the last 2 seasons. He's going to get that opportunity with the Raiders, and the 12s and his former teammates are going to be cheering him on from afar. So best wishes to KJ Wright, and looking forward to the day that your number and your name get lifted up into the rafters at Lumen Field. It's going to happen someday when he becomes a member of the Ring of Honor. When we come back in the second quarter, I know the 53-man roster was dropped like 24 hours ago, but John Schneider's already at work manipulating that roster. We're going to look at a number of moves that the Seahawks have made over the past 24 hours to bolster their roster at a number of different positions, plus an injured reserve notation as well. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Football season is back. Let's make the most of it with a better way to create your own custom pool at runyourpool.com. The premier sports pool hosting service, Run Your Pool, makes it ridiculously easy to run a football pool with friends, family, or office mates. They offer dozens of formats, including Survivor, Pick'em, Squares, Margin, Confidence Pools, 33, and more. Run Your Pool hosts formats for NFL and college football with 1-week games, full season playoffs, or the Super Bowl. And unlike other fantasy sports platforms, Run Your Pool has options and settings to make it your own. You can even brand your pool for your local business, bar, or restaurant. Reconnect with friends and join nearly 2 million football fans to make every game action-packed this season. Check them out today and get $10 off at runyourpool.com/lockedon, or use our promo code LOCKEDON at checkout. Anywhere, everywhere in the world, Run Your Pool helps friends and colleagues compete. The NFL season starts September 9th. Start today at runyourpool.com/lockedon and have your pool up and running in minutes. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Thursday edition. I'm your host, Corbin Smith, joined as always by Rob Rang. On Tuesday, the Seahawks revealed their initial 53-man roster, but as Rob and I have been warning you for the last couple of weeks, as we warned you last year at this time, that initial 53-man roster was going to undergo changes. And sure enough, within 24 hours, a number of players that were on that initial 53 had been cut or put on injured reserve, and a few newcomers coming from other rosters now have joined the team. And Rob, these guys didn't make the roster for the team they were with in training camp, but the two players that the Seahawks claimed this year compared to previous seasons, there have been several years where players they've claimed, I've looked at the guys and thought, I don't know if that player is going to fit in or how long they're going to be here. But the two players the Seahawks claimed off waivers are at positions of need and look like they could be potential factors, most notably the center, Dakoda Shepley, who airs from the University of British Columbia. Got a chance to talk to him today. Not only is he a versatile football player that can play guard as well as center, the Seahawks are viewing him as a center now that they've claimed him off waivers, but he's also an established actor, and I got so excited today hearing that he was Omega Red in Deadpool 2. That is so awesome. So he might not be a football celebrity yet, but he was a celebrity coming into that locker room today for a different reason.
Yeah, I mean, 3 different movies he already has to his credit. I mean, I've been very impressed from him just in that regard. And, you know, all jokes aside, Corbin, what I was also impressed by was his game tape. And I didn't necessarily think that was going to be the case. As you just mentioned, this is a Canadian football player. Played his college ball at BC and played tackle. And that's a pretty difficult transition to make that move back inside, where obviously you are much closer quarters. You're going to be going up against bigger, more physical players in a much quicker space of time. And so that's a very difficult transition. So even with Pete Carroll just gushing about the fact that the Seattle was able to get this young man after he was released, and there were several teams that had, been kicking the tires and contacting his agents about possibly bringing him. The fact that the Seahawks will reward this player, I thought, okay, let's watch some tape. Let's see what this guy can do. And it just so happens, Corbin, that the San Francisco 49ers final preseason game was against the Los Angeles Chargers, who, of course, the Seahawks had already played. So it was a really easy comparison to see, well, how did Kyle Fuller do against the Los Angeles Chargers? How did this young man do against the Los Angeles Chargers? And that's the thing, is I was so impressed with Shepley's initial quickness, with his lateral agility, with the fact that he came back in and played left guard as well as center. I really think that he gives him some positional versatility. It's going to take a couple of weeks, of course, to learn Seattle's offense. But as excited as I am about the improvement that I saw in Kyle Fuller over the preseason, I'll tell you what, this kid, I think has some talent, and I'm excited to see what Dakoda Shepley, with his size, with his upside, to me, what he might be able to do, especially considering, again, how much improvement I saw from Kyle Fuller over the last couple of weeks. I think Dakoda Shepley is a better athlete. He's a very similarly built man. And we talked about this before. If you're going to try, and John Schneider is as good at this as anybody, if you are going to be plucking players from those released from other rosters, then do it with really good teams And as we've talked about so many times, Corbin, the San Francisco 49ers and Kyle Shanahan know how to run the football. And this kid can get some push. He's quick to the second level. I think it makes all the sense in the world if the Seahawks, again, pluck from a divisional rival, might just find out that they got a player very much like DJ Reed a year ago who could wind up surprising this season.
I think that this kid could be in the starting lineup at some point for the Seahawks. I know that he just practiced for the first time today, and reporters didn't get a chance to see him beyond the first 5 minutes of practice anyway. So we're not going to be able to tell you how he looked out there. But watching the film, I got some all-22 from a couple of the 49ers games. This kid did not give up a pressure on 36 pass protection snaps at the center position during the preseason. And I was so impressed with his lateral quickness and his movement skills in the run game. He can move people off the ball a little bit. I don't think power is necessarily his game, but he's capable, something that we have not seen from Ethan Posick or Kyle Fuller. I've seen a little bit of that, at least in preseason games, going against reserves. That's what needs to be noted here, is he's not playing against starters for the most part, but still very impressed by his lateral quickness. And that could bode really well in this offense that I think is going to be running a lot more of the wide outside zone. You want a center that has those lateral movement skills, and I think Shepley provides that for you. So this is a fantastic opportunity for him and an easy player for fans to root for, not just because they want to see an upgraded center, but because of his background as an actor as well. Great personality, as we got to see today in our first opportunity to speak with him. But he's not the only player they added off waivers that I think might have a chance to compete for playing time sooner than anticipated. And I've been waiting all day to say this guy's name again, because is there a better name for a football player, especially a secondary player, than Nigel Warrior? I mean, it's fantastic. And this is a kid that I remember watching at Tennessee. He was a safety at Tennessee. He was a first-team All-SEC player his senior year. And we know the talent that comes out of that conference. He had 4 interceptions that year to tie for the conference lead. They're playing him at cornerback. That's where the Ravens used him the last 2 years. He got some action in games this year with there actually being a preseason. And he had 2 pass breakups, didn't allow any touchdowns, had 7 tackles as well. Pretty sound tackler from his safety background. You see a lot of the traits the Seahawks like at the cornerback spot in terms of physicality and toughness. And he's not very tall. He's only 5'10", around 185, 190 pounds, but he has 32 and 5/8-inch arms. And I know that they've brought in some guys with sub 32-inch arms, but you still know Pete Carroll prefers cornerbacks that have those longer arms because of how it helps them in press coverage and being able to get their hands on the football. This kid knows how to get his hands on the football. So I think once he gets his feet under him, it's going to take some time, just like with Shepley. But I think Warrior is a player that could really put on a battle in the cornerback competition moving forward.
I think he could as well. I mean, he certainly is an aptly named player, because when you watch Nigel Warrior on tape, he is a really physical guy, as Pete Carroll and others have already acknowledged. And that's the thing, is that there have been times, Corbin, where I've seen Seattle sign a cornerback. You watch him in training camp, you watch him in mini camp, and you're just like, well, that guy right there doesn't tackle the way that Pete Carroll wants cornerbacks to tackle. Nigel Warrior does tackle that way. And so I think that that's what's exciting about it. I'm curious to see if he's going to be able to handle, obviously, that very difficult transition of safety to cornerback and just being able to handle the coverage responsibilities against some of the super quick receivers that we're seeing in today's NFL. But I think it's important that you acknowledge that he does have a little bit of a shorter stature, but those really long arms. And I think, at least from my perspective, and doing all this draft stuff for years and things like that, and just trying and being a little bit lazy, honestly, and just saying, okay, this guy's got 32-inch arms, he's in that Seahawk category. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of NFL teams did as well, and why it was just a surprise that Seahawks had as much success they had with DJ Reed, that they drafted Trey Brown, et cetera, made the trade for Sidney Jones, et cetera, et cetera. I think with Nigel Warrior, it's kind of a return back. This is what Pete Carroll in his heart feels like are the players that I think he wants, but even more so than that arm length, where, again, people like me have gotten a little lazier. I think priority number one is you've got to be a physical football player to compete for Pete Carroll, and Nigel Warrior is. And so that's the thing, is like, I love that when we started this segment here, we talked about the fact that John Schneider has his 53-man roster, but he is going to tinker, and kind of play around when he finds better players than what he currently is already on the roster. And I think the Seahawks did that. I really like the signing of Nigel Ward. I even like the signing of Dakoda Shepley even more so, because I think that he absolutely has a chance to legitimately be a starter. And I think the Warrior is more of a guy that you can develop and perhaps be that in the future. But I am excited about both of them. And I think that there are some other signs that they've made here since that are also exciting.
Yeah, there's a couple other signings we can break down, one on the active roster and one on the practice squad. The third signing on the active roster, Jake Luton, former Oregon State quarterback, replacing Sean Mannion. So it really was an Oregon State alumni swap at the quarterback position. And Luton got a little bit of action last year with the Jaguars, 6 interceptions, 2 touchdowns, struggled when he got his opportunities to play. But again, that was a really poor Jacksonville Jaguars team. So you can excuse him for the performance. He struggled, wasn't ready to be playing quarterback in the NFL, but he's got a big arm, a good sized quarterback. And so maybe a player they can develop. I anticipate ultimately he's going to be on the practice squad, but for now, he's a roster spot holder, and he's going to get a chance for now to be able to compete against Geno Smith and try to win some snaps behind Russell Wilson. It's a good opportunity for him coming back to the Pacific Northwest. He's from Marysville, so he was excited for the opportunity to return home. And then on the practice squad, you and I talked a few years ago about this. This player is going to be on the opposite sideline when the Seahawks play the Colts in week 1, but Mo Alley-Cox a few years ago coming out of VCU. I was really excited about the prospect of the Seahawks signing him, and the Seahawks were very interested, but ultimately he picked the Colts because he thought he would be able to see the field quicker. Well, the Seahawks love to bring in basketball players to see if they can play tight end, whether it's a George Fant, he can play offensive line, or it's Mark Vitale, who played at Baylor on their national championship team last year. 6'5", 250 pounds, physical player, really good rebounder, soft hands, outstanding athlete. And apparently, according to Jake Heaps, he has had work with Russell Wilson in San Diego this offseason. And so there's already a connection there. Hasn't played football since 8th grade, but he's already said some people are conjuring up Antonio Gates comparisons. If he could even be a quarter of Antonio Gates, the Seahawks would be absolutely thrilled.
Yeah, absolutely, they would be. And I think it's interesting. Jake Heaps is saying, of course, Jake Heaps is as close to Russell Wilson as just about anybody in the media. So that's interesting. If this is one of the players that maybe the Russell Wilson has pushed for Seattle to sign, that could obviously be quite the statement about where the franchise is with acknowledging the value and the perspective that their star quarterback has. And then when I see this young man, and now he was on the basketball court, and the last time I saw it, I hate to mention this because a lot of Pacific Northwest fans out there who are Seahawks fans as well as Gonzaga Bulldog fans. And they might remember this young man and the fact that he led Baylor to that national championship game, had the most rebounds in the national championship game, the physicality that this 6'5", 250-pounder showed in that game. This is a big, good-looking athlete. And as you mentioned, if a guy like Antonio Gates or like a Tony Gonzalez or like a George Fant, there's so many good tight ends especially who have previously been or basketball players, whether it be NBA or otherwise. And that's the thing is one of the things I've always kind of thought is, when you think about basketball and the way the players, pass the ball around, nobody ever lets the ball hit them in the chest. They always catch it with their hands. And obviously that's critical as a receiver. And the big question is going to be whether this young man, 6'5", 250 pounds, if he has the physicality to be able to hold at the line of point of attack as a blocker. But you love the upside. And isn't this what the practice squad is for, is guys like this? So that's what I love about it is the Seahawks are swinging for the fences. They're acknowledging that this is a practice squad guy that has upside. So sign him, make your quarterback happy potentially, and then maybe you just get yourself a diamond in the rough who knows? Maybe he is the second coming of Antonio Gates. And what a huge, huge signing that would be for the Seahawks if he was.
And right now the Seahawks are pretty short-handed at the tight end position. So anybody that's thinking, oh, this is just another example like Michael Jacobson in training camp where they're just bringing in a guy just to take a look, and maybe he'll only be there for a few days and they'll move on. But I would think signing him at this stage, that suggests to me, hey, the regular season's right around the corner. We really want to take a legitimate look at this kid, and we know that he's really athletic watching him on the basketball court at Baylor and the physicality he brings, I want to see what this kid can do as a blocker. I could see him being like Mo Alley-Cox and evolving over time into a quality all-around tight end. And Mo Alley-Cox hadn't played football since end of middle school either. So it can be done. We have seen a few players do that at the tight end position. The Seahawks are hoping that Vital can be that player that can do that for them now on their own practice squad. When we return in the third quarter, we didn't get to answer your mailbag questions on Monday because of cut down day coming up. We're going to make up for missing that segment and answer your questions on our weekly mailbag segment. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's that time of year again, and all eyes are turning now to football as teams are back on the gridiron to start the football season. As always, BetOnline is your number one spot for all the pro and college football action this season. Get all the updated odds, props, and contests, including online's biggest $500,000 NFL mega contest and the world's largest 200,000 NFL Survivor contest. Open now at BetOnline. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 100% welcome bonus. And make sure to check out their opening day super promo. Make a bet on Thursday, September 9th during the season opener between the Buccaneers and Cowboys. And if you lose your wager, you'll be refunded up to $25 for new customers only when signing up and using promo code NFL100. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports, whether it's football, basketball, boxing, or your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait and take advantage of all the great offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible to stock all the parts you need in a traditional chain storefront. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the counterman orders the parts on his computer, choosing only the brand his warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. One reason to repair and maintain your cars is to save money that you can use on other important things like a mortgage or food. Why would you choose to spend 30%, 50%, or even 100% more for the exact same auto parts at a chain store or a new car dealership? RockAuto.com is a family business serving auto parts customers online for 20 years. Go to RockAuto.com to shop for auto and body parts from hundreds of manufacturers. The RockAuto.com catalog is unique and remarkably easy to navigate. Quickly see all the parts available for your vehicle and choose the brands, specifications, and prices you prefer. Best of all, prices at rockauto.com are always reliably low, and the same for professionals and do-it-yourselfers. Why spend up to twice as much for the same parts? Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Thursday edition. I'm your host, Corbin Smith, joined as always by Rob Rang. Normally, we tackle your questions on Monday. This has kind of been a weird preseason, though. The NFL throwing a mini bye into play between the last preseason game and the season opener. And Tuesday was the cut down day, so a lot of news for us to cover. We decided to move the mailbag towards the end of the week. So without further ado, let's tackle your questions. The first one here coming from Hawk99 tweets, how many years are left in the Seahawks Super Bowl window? It looks like we're cutting it close with players like Dwayne Brown and Carlos Dunlap not getting any younger. This is a really interesting question because on one hand, Rob, there are a lot of young players in this team that are very intriguing that could play key roles on this football team in 2021. That suggests that window might be open wider for a longer period of time maybe than some anticipate. But you do have players like Brown and Dunlap, and I'm even going to throw Russell Wilson in there just because of what happened this last offseason. If you don't meet expectations, we don't know what's going to happen on that front either. So certainly there's some question marks about how long this team is going to be able to be a true Super Bowl contender like they are viewed right now.
I don't know. I mean, it's not very often, Corbin, that you and I disagree. But I think that on the heels of watching Tom Brady win a Super Bowl at his age, and Russell Wilson has always been so adamant how long he's going to play, and the fact that he's never missed a game, I don't know that the Seahawks Super Bowl window is closing anytime soon. As long as Russell Wilson is playing at the MVP caliber level of play that he played at least in the first half of last season, which as an acknowledgement of your point. He certainly has to play at that level. I think that's just it's kind of the sad reality of the NFL is that you can have one heck of a team, but if you don't have yourself a franchise quarterback, then everything has to go right for you to be the Baltimore Ravens and win. And I don't mean to be disrespectful of Trent Dilfer, but he is not the same caliber of a player that some of the other quarterbacks that won Super Bowls. Joe Flacco is not as well. I'd argue Eli Manning is not as well. Doesn't matter. That's getting off the point. The point is, I don't think that the Seahawks window is closing that quickly. I remember having a conversation at the University of Washington Pro Day. It might have just been the one that Sidney Jones was working out at, and having a conversation with John Schneider. And he talked about the fact that he felt like his Seahawks at that point, with the Legion of Boom kind of moving away, that they had to do a refresh. And I feel like they've done that. I think the Seahawks team is about ready to explode. I'm excited to see what they're going to be able to do in the NFC West. Obviously, there are situations that could come up in which the season just absolutely falls apart. An injury to Russell Wilson being a huge part of that. But barring an injury to Wilson or any of the other absolutely critical members of this team, the Dwayne Browns, the DK Metcalfs, the Bobby Wagners, the Carlos Dunlaps, obviously some aging players there. But I think you're still talking about a division title favorite and absolutely a Super Bowl contender right now and next year as well.
And I'm really encouraged by the youth and the fact that the player you just locked up for $17.5 million, Jamal Adams, is still only 25 years old. I mean, he's just entering the prime of his career. So there's a lot of reason to be optimistic about this team being able to compete for championships for the next several seasons. The key ultimately is going to be keeping number 3 happy. And as long as they're competing for division titles and they can make some noise in the playoffs, something they have not been able to do for the last several years, if they can get that done, you can keep your quarterback happy. And ultimately, that keeps your window open as long as that QB is playing at a high level. They've got a lot of pieces around him that are now under contract for at least a couple of years. So I do think the window's open for at least a couple more years. A lot of this rides on what happens with Russell Wilson, how this season plays out, but the pieces are in place for them to be able to contend for quite some time still. David Hershey tweets, does Sidney Jones become a starter at cornerback if he stays healthy? I feel like there's a lot of factors at play trying to answer that question.
I agree. I think that obviously the durability with Sidney Jones, obviously the level of play with DJ Reed, Trey Flowers, Killer Witherspoon, whatever, and just in pure talent, I think that Sidney Jones will be a starter for the Seahawks. I think that he is the most gifted cornerback that's on their roster in terms of coverage. Now, I still think that Trey Flowers is their best run defender. And I think that sometimes with Pete Carroll, you have to play the run before he's even going to let you consider playing the pass. And I think that that's one of the arguments that some Seahawks fans out there have kind of been arguing, is that the game has changed a little bit. And maybe that's part of the reason why Seattle has been a little bit more willing to use some of these smaller corners. But I am a huge, huge fan of Sidney Jones' talent. I was then. I continue to be, and I was encouraged by the fact that he did struggle with injuries in Philadelphia, and I thought really resurrected his career in Jacksonville. I can't believe that the Jacksonville Jaguars let him go for a 6th-round pick. And I think, again, as we talked about before, with like the tight end and some of the other free agent moves the Seahawks have, to me, this is one of those buy low and you have so much upside type of moves. But yes, to quickly answer that question, I think that Sidney Jones absolutely will be a starter. Wouldn't be surprised if it happens as early as October.
I think there's a pretty good chance this happens. Again, the real disclaimer here is, does he stay healthy? Because that has been a problem for him throughout his NFL career. But he really played well in Jacksonville's defense a year ago. And I think that was really the big issue during training camp, is you got a new defensive coordinator that came in. They were running a different system that may not have necessarily fit Jones's strengths. Like last year's scheme with Todd Wash, a former Pete Carroll disciple, it's a very similar scheme to what he's going to be in now in Seattle. And so I think that is going to benefit him immensely. It's going to allow him to hit the ground running, so to speak. And the fact that he was coached up by Jimmy Lake, now Washington's head football coach, he was the defensive backs coach when Sidney Jones was there. So the fact that Lake was the coach that really worked with Sidney Jones going into the NFL, he's been taught a lot of the techniques. Pete Carroll emphasized that in a press conference a couple of days ago, that was something that immediately jumped out. They knew about him playing at Washington, learning from Jimmy Lake. So all those factors added up. I absolutely think he's got a chance to be a starter for this football team as long as he can stay on the field. Fran tweets, what are your thoughts on the new look offense? You think they address the predictability issue? I don't know about you, Rob, but I feel like until we actually see Russell Wilson in the starting offense play in game action, it's going to be difficult to know whether they solved the predictability issue because Shane Waldron has never been a coordinator in an NFL regular season game.
Yeah, I agree with you. I would say that I was very intrigued by the jet sweep. You saw, by D. Eskridge, the fact that you saw Rashad Penny do a very similar type of play. And so I thought that there was enough of a peek behind the curtain to suggest that this is going to be a different and more dynamic, more explosive and unpredictable offense. And I think when you consider all of the individual physical talent that the Seahawks have on the field, it could be a pretty exciting season. So I do think that we have seen signs over the preseason that any concerns about predictability on offense is pretty likely to be answered this year.
We've just got to see how those concepts are utilized in a regular season game and how Waldron adapts during the game. Those are things we have not had a chance to see yet. And so the curtain has not been pulled back very much. I'm curious to see what things look like. I think there's reason for optimism, but need to see some regular season game action, see how Waldron responds to some of these elements as a first-time coordinator. Christopher tweets, do you think Seattle will look to add either David Moore or Jacob Hollister back? Well, I can tell you one of them they will not be. Jacob Hollister agreed to terms with the Jaguars today. A lot of Seahawks going to the Jaguars this offseason and out into the season. So Hollister's off the board. I would be surprised. I'm not going to rule it out, but I would be surprised if they bring back David Moore because they really like the 4 receivers that they have in their practice squad, and it gives them some flexibility to be able to elevate one of those players or 2 of those players for regular season games to the new practice squad rules. If they really wanted to add a receiver to the fold, I would have thought they already would have done it. Again, I'm not going to completely rule it out, but I'd be surprised if they go that route now.
I would be as well. I thought that, the way that the Seahawks constructed their 53-man roster, Corbin, I guess caught me by surprise a little bit, but I think it was actually kind of genius. The fact that they had the 4 receivers on their roster and then kept 4 for the practice squad, who notably none of those 4 obviously wound up signing with other squads. So John Schneider and scouts did a terrific job of kind of identifying the players that were likely to be signed away and the ones that they might be able to sneak onto the practice squad. I believe that Ty Dan Gonzalez wrote an article on Seahawks SI about this and just how that's a brilliant move. I really think that is something that Seattle's kind of been playing on for a while. And as much as I think that David Moore remains a possible candidate, I think the Seattle feels very, very good about the 8 receivers that they basically have on their roster. Obviously, the 4 on the active roster, but the 4 that they know who are currently on the practice squad and have been on their roster for the last several months and know the different offense that Shane Waldron has rather than the one that David Moore or any of the other players in the past had experienced with the Seahawks previously.
And our last question here coming from Gecko tweets, considering our current cornerback situation, do you think letting Shaquille Griffin go to the Jaguars was a good move as it was considered by many at the time? I don't know where you stand on this, but we haven't even seen a regular season game with Griffin in Jacksonville yet. And the 2 preseason games that I watched looking at Sidney Jones, I thought Shaquille Griffin looked pretty rough out there, to be honest with you. But I feel like it's way too early to make any verdicts on this. The Seahawks could have a corner jump out of nowhere in the regular season and have a fantastic year at the left spot. Maybe DJ Reed moves over to the left side now and ends up turning in a really good year, and then it won't be a big deal. But there's also the chance that nobody emerges. They rotate a bunch of different players on the left side, and Shaquille Griffin has a really strong first year in Jacksonville, and then the team might be kicking themselves. I just think it's way too early to make a verdict on that.
I think it's too early, and I think it was too expensive. Shaq Griffin's a good player, and I expect him to have success in Jacksonville. That's a really interesting, commentary about the way that he's performed in the preseason. I had not watched his preseason tape that closely because he's no longer on the Seahawks. But I really believe in Shaq Griffin's talent. I believe in who he is as a man and the opportunities I've had to interview he and his brother. And I really think that he is going to, again, be successful in Jacksonville. But Seattle was behind, it was up against the salary cap. And you're going to, if you do a good job of drafting, you're going to draft and develop players that eventually you're going to have to replace. That's just the reality of the situation, especially when you have some superstars the way that the Seahawks do. And so I think Shaq Griffin is going to wind up playing very well in Jacksonville. I also have confidence that Seattle is going to be able to figure out their secondary, and certainly am willing to acknowledge that they could have done just about everything that they wanted to and still not be able to bring back Shaq Griffin if they wanted to bring back any of the other players that they did. I thought one of the most critical decisions was to bring back Carlos Dunlap. I don't think that they could have done that otherwise. They couldn't have done the move with, or the deal with Jamal Adams the way that they did. So I think that the Seahawks made the best move they possibly could at that point.
Agreed. I think we can both agree on that. The money was it was too expensive. As good of a player as Shaquille Griffin has been, he was a Pro Bowler at one point. That was a really hefty price tag with the other contracts they had to address. And you just got to let some guys go sometimes. It happens. Like you said, you draft, develop guys. Sometimes you got to let players go because you can't pay them all. The NFL season is about to begin, and nobody covers it like the Locked On Podcast Network. August 30th through September 8th, Locked On's Ultimate Season Preview is taking you through every team and every division with the help of Odyssey's Ross Tucker and Jason Lockenfora. Follow the Ultimate Season Preview feed on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcast to tune in beginning August 30th. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Check out Locked On Seahawks on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and the all-new Odyssey app. That's AUDACY. Coming up on our Blue Friday show, I'm going to be chatting with John Shepley of the Jaguar Report about Seattle's new corner, Sidney Jones, and what Seahawk fans should expect, plus some predictions for the 2021 season. Thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Go Hawks.